Welcome to the Backstory, a special series from Future of Faith. In each episode, we take a look behind the scenes of projects from the National Storytelling Initiative on Christian Faith and Life. We'll be pulling back the curtains on our own work, sharing the wins and the struggles, and inviting others on to do the same. We're going to learn from each other and build this community together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Packard with Future of Faith. This is a special series that we're doing. I'm joined by my friends Shannon Hopkins for Rooted Good and Elizabeth Coffey from the Lake Institute. If you work in the storytelling ecosystem, you know that the grant reports rarely tell the whole story, and they often come at the very end. And so we wanted to change that, wanted to dig deeper and to help get some of the stuff to the people who could use it when they could actually use it. So in these podcasts, Elizabeth and Shannon and I will be pulling back the curtain on some of our own storytelling work, both past and current. And we're also going to share conversations from people in the field who are working in other organizations on storytelling grant work and see what challenges they're facing, what lessons they've learned, what they've tried that maybe didn't work so well, and what maybe had unanticipated success. So we're really glad you're here for this episode and for this entire series.
Okay, I have a question for y'all. The last couple of episodes, we've talked about questions a lot. And so that doesn't need to be buttoned up because some of our guests have given us super beautifully, tied up with a bow questions that they're asking their audiences right now. Yours does not need to be that because I'm springing this on you right now. But as you're doing this, what is a question as you're doing your work, leaning further into your projects, what is a question you're holding that feels new now? It's not the same one maybe you were holding when you wrote the grant proposal, but I'm just curious if you're holding a new question inside of your project or related to it in some way that you could share. I'm drawing out all my words to give you enough time to think of that question. But
You're an expert facilitator, Elizabeth. So as part of their background work, I mean, so things are going to get really layered here. So as part of the background work for Asha and company that they're doing with TMF, they have these interviews with, I hesitate to say experts because I'm one of them. I call people who might know something. And I just got done doing mine. And with Mike Horn, and what he made me think that was so different than the way I had been thinking about this before was the question that became how might your stories travel?
Mhm.
And one of the examples he gave that was, I think, very relevant to a U.S. audience because of Oprah's book club. You can sort of you didn't write the book. Oprah's not commissioning books, but it's a stamp of approval of Oprah's book club, and then that message then travels. That story of you are now in this circle of all these books. It's more than it felt to me like more than branding, and so I'm sort of thinking about that right now. Of how might we be able to do this in a way that would allow to further decentralize ourselves? And I think we already have a fairly decentered version of a project, but to push even further in that direction.
Oh, I love that. It's really nice.
I think I'll think of something better later. It's the springing on me, Elizabeth. But I'm going to go back to the conversation that, Melissa Wigington in an earlier conversation that we listened to, she said, people need experiences of belonging, transcendence, and transformation, those three things. And I think one of the things that I'm wondering is, will our storytelling work really give people the stories in which they can discover those, new places of belonging, an encounter that takes them into transcendence, gives them something of transformation, and I don't know, I think that's it. Will we do this? I think that's what I'm holding is with her on that. And can our work really provide that?
Are you nervous about that, Shannon? Are you concerned that? Are you I don't know if we can, or you're
Well,
well, we're
I
gonna
think,
figure out a way how?
it's interesting. I mean, this is just, I think I'm at an inflection point in my own career right now. So, and the state of the world feels so much more fraught.
Rock solid and hopeful and
so normally,
awesome.
Normally, I am such a, of course we can do this, of course we can and I've always had this, we can, move the needle on human trafficking, and we can like change the economic model for women in homelessness, and we can, we can really do this like dramatic, life altering work in a way that demonstrates the kingdom of God. I normally don't have any kind of thought imagining that, but I'm thinking right now with the state of the world where it's at and how noisy everything is, I'm like, yeah, are we gonna are like, and even these beautiful stories that I think are stories where new ways of belonging to one another, that are stories where God is showing up in the world in really beautiful ways, and work that's transforming neighborhoods. Like, we know those stories are out there, but like can people, are they going to be able to encounter them given everything else that's going on in the world? I just think that's a big question I'm holding personally. So, and I am nervous. I'm just nervous about the context and time at which we're doing this work. Like, it feels more crucial, more needed, but contested. I think it's going to be a contested space as well. So
It actually has me wondering, not doubting, because I feel like I know what I can do at this point in my career. Like I know what I can do. I know what I cannot do. But what I don't know and what I'm wondering is like, are the things that I can do going to be useful in this increasingly noisy world? And that I just don't know the answer to. And it's like, and so in some ways it's like a version of the question of like, am I the right person to be involved in this? And I'm very grateful that we've set on a strategy at Future of Faith where we're going to hire people to execute and really strategize around this project. Like, I am not going to be the center of this universe by any stretch of the imagination. And so I'm really grateful for that. And sometimes I do wonder, like, that day comes for all of us when it's, we had more to offer than we have to offer. I don't think I'm there yet, but the world is changing so fast that it does raise the question.
Okay,
Well,
I want to plug, sorry, I was about to change, shift a little bit, I want to plug a super obscure film right now that I think I'm just
Is it Top Gun?
Yeah, no. So this film, and shout out to Nathan Clark, documentary filmmaker who founded Fourth Line Films out of Richmond, Virginia. They're amazing. But he recommended this film to me. So I am not an obscure film watcher, but he is, and he's given me some great, just things to get inspired by. And he told me about this film, 1987 film called Babette's Feast.
Oh, okay. Amazing film.
Yes, amazing film. Yes,
that
but
speaks
like
to my age. I think I saw it in 1987.
I'm totally left out.
Yes, yeah. No, I was born in 1988, so I didn't catch this one live. But Shannon, I'm glad you did. And but I watched it, and I mean, if anyone goes and watches this and is like, how is she going to connect this, or has watched it and is wondering how is she going to connect this to what Shannon just said, I think that that whole story is about Babette, this woman doing exactly what she was created to do, in a world of religious piety that delivers a new message for an entire community of belief, of a church, essentially, this pious, aging, dwindling church, and she bringing exactly who she was, true to form, and it came in the form of like a meal, right, a feast. But I think of that film when you're talking about what you just said, Shannon, because I think about like what our world uniquely needs, or our society uniquely needs right now, is us to do what we were always meant to do and deliver what we were always meant to deliver. And I think that, I think about that wonky, wacky film that I think is like ingrained in my heart now of like, what does it mean to participate with honesty and authenticity in this time, delivering a message that nobody thinks they want yet changes their lives. So
Okay, that's really powerful. Thank you. That's actually super hopeful, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. Like, not only am I going to go watch Babette's Feast so I'm not left out of this conversation, but I'm going to be carrying that with me through the rest of the day for at least or the week. Like that's a good place to be.
Well,
For
and
sure.
it honestly makes me think about, not to segue too early into this, but like the conversation with today's guest of like, what are the narratives that we're naming we're coming up against in our society right now? And what is the alternative we're providing? I think it's why I was drawn to this RFP in the first place, why I geeked out over it when I read it, is like the opportunity here to do just that. So
For
how
sure.
how are y'all sitting? I mean, that's not a small task. But I think, and Shannon, you said normally, I mean, in your healthiest, lightest day, you are the optimist we all need. Like in our life.
Elizabeth, on her worst day, she's the optimist.
That's true. Her worst day, yeah, that is total. Like, what am I saying? But I do think, like, I think uniquely in this time, I don't know, what's giving y'all hope in leaning into that type of work today?
There was I'm working on a project right now at Future Faith, aside from storytelling, about listening as leadership in ministry settings. And so we're just in the process where we're doing some like background interviews and really trying to stress test some assumptions and, hopefully to get to an outline here soon. And so we're in this like, we're not spitballing, but it's like brainstorming inside of a fairly narrow structure. And we hit on this like really helpful, for me anyway, thought exercise of, if you could only pick between either having information about somebody fall out of the sky to you that you could then act on, their favorite food, what music they like, their background, whatever, or getting to ask somebody questions about their life, but never getting to actually know the answer. Like somehow it just gets lost in translation and you don't actually understand the information and you cannot then act on it. Which would you choose? Right? Would you like, and because we're trying to get at this like transactional style of leadership. That's for a different conversation. But in this context, it made me think of like just how clearly for me, I was like, I would rather do the asking. I want the other person to know that I'm curious and and that, that like I think they're worth the time. And that is so often what I think has not been communicated very clearly in the church is that like you're worth our time. And so what gives me hope is that I think there's a set of projects out here that are basically telling people, we're the church at some level. I could be so bold. And you're worth our time. And it's not just us, like it's not just Future Faith, it's not just TMF, it's not just, the work of the people that we know. There's like basically everybody is saying some version of that. And that makes me, and they wanted to, and basically like 1,200 applicants wanted to do that. And, they couldn't fund everybody, but that gives me hope, is like, man, I hope we do that justice through our project on behalf of not just ourselves, but the other 1,100 people who didn't get selected, who I'm sure had awesome projects also.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Hold on. Wait, can you still hear
Technical
me?
difficulties.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Did
gonna
you
off
just
my
lose an
mic.
AirPod?
I did. They're new because I lost one on the plane. Yeah, okay. And I'm hoping you can edit that a bit, so.
No, I'm leaving
I
all that
love
in.
that.
All that, I think like where are you finding hope? Interesting. I keep coming across like Bonhoeffer quotes again, and I think one of the things that I think just does keep giving me hope is like sometimes things are darkest before dawn, like that actually renewal comes in the breaking apart of things, and that we find our way back to ourselves in these moments. And so I think I am finding hope in like actually God's still at work in the world. There are these beautiful stories of Christian communities that are like the stories of resistance and love, but like that are also just like everyday stories of like just the way, people showing up for their next door neighbor and loving on one another, just that it's not always the most dramatic story either. It's just being who we're uniquely called to be in this moment is in itself can be transformative to the other, and trusting that when it's all put together, it's gonna have an aroma that is just so attractive to people. Anyway, so I don't know if that's kind of where I'm finding hope right now.
I think that's lovely. That
That is
is
lovely.
hope.
Thanks. I'm gonna find my other AirPod. Give me a second.
Well, Shannon goes and looks for her other AirPod on the floor or something. We can transition over to, so we've got Ross Allen,
I
from
can't
Christian
find it.
Century. He's gonna. You cannot find. Did you lose it?
It's
You lost it on the
really at
plane,
the
and now you
back.
lost
No,
it.
no, no. It's really at the back. I'm
Okay.
gonna have to get it another time. I can see it. I can't get it.
Uh,
Anyway,
anyway,
welcome to my life.
Ross is going to join us for a conversation because Christian Century has a storytelling grant. They've also been doing this. They're about a year in, and it's you'll hear, I think, in this interview that they're sort of an execution engine. I mean,
Hmm.
it's impressive what they've already been able to do, and the clarity and how well the project fits the organization that's doing it is super compelling. So we'll break here and we'll come back for a little bit of discussion, but enjoy the conversation with Ross. Okay, folks, this is Josh. I'm here with Ross Allen, and Ross has a storytelling grant like all the people that we're talking to. But the difference here is that as we sit and record this in February 2026, most of us have only had the storytelling grant for a month or so, month and a half. But Ross, you all have had yours for much longer. So Ross, welcome. Thank you for chatting with us today. I'm so excited to learn because you're a little bit further down the line here. So tell us a little bit. What is the purpose? What did you pitch? What's your project about? And how's it going?
Hey, well, thanks, Josh. Really glad to be here. Yeah, so we were part of an initial round of folks that got our grants about a year ahead of time relative to the rest of the funding round. And so with that, we are almost exactly 1 year in from when the horse kind of left the starting line. And we're probably part of the way through phase one. We've been thinking in terms of dreaming really big, but trying to be really clear about what deliverables are possible on a specific timeline. So we've got about 8 arms of activity that we're hoping to work on in the next 5 years. And we've got about 3 of those that are solidly into implementation phase, with the rest still kind of in a becoming phase, which can feel kind of daunting at one point, but it's been an organic process. And as I'll share a little bit more, our first things that we're launching are cohort-based training programs. And so really hopeful and eager for the fact that we're actually kind of building partnerships in phase one that will directly help us build the team of people who can help us as we look to the next phases of the project. But to take a step back, the overarching emphasis of what we're trying to do is really around reclaiming the story of American Christianity. That's kind of our buzzy little sentence we use, but it comes from I think, mutual recognition that there are 2 predominating stories with American Christianity right now, and I should say Christianity in the United States more specifically. And the one is kind of the mainline decline story that historic churches that have been more inclusive of LGBT people, more oriented around social justice, are in unambiguous decline, and that they are in this process of dying. And then on the flip side of that, you have the right-wing Christian nationalist story, which says essentially that if you want to have some kind of claim to equality, or if you want your church to be growing, you need to align yourself with more conservative impulses in the United States, particularly thinking political conservatism rather than theological conservatism. Although I think there are interesting conversations about the overlap and intersections of those things. In any event, we look around at ourselves at the century and then at the churches that embody the kind of faith that the Christian century has historically proclaimed. We see living, breathing alternatives of churches that are alive, that are committed to a more pluralistic, embracing expression of the gospel and the Christian story. And that doesn't mean we always agree about everything with regard to LGBT stuff or what it means to live out a life of social justice, but that we have people who are committed to embodying an alternative and are actually out there doing that already. And that in some respects, those kinds of Christian communities are the best kept secret in American religion, and we want to get the word out about them.
They do feel like the best or worst kept secret. I mean, it's, I don't know how you like it. I wish that it was more prominent. And I love this idea of reclaiming. I mean, I think that aligns with a lot of the projects that I've heard about already. To some extent, even with my own project that we're working on, they're very much engaged with 3 mainline denominations. And so I think that there's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you here is because there's so much that you're doing that I think a lot of us can learn from, not just because of the fact that you're so further along, but even the sort of the orientation of the work at Christian Century, and then like the things that you are starting to put out already. So can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I know there's some stuff up on the web, so like where could people find it, and like because you're sort of creating resources there that I think so many people could use as they're thinking about their own work.
Oh, well, I'm very grateful if it's of a help to others. And yeah, the website you can visit is thenarrativeproject.org. You do need the in there. If you go narrative project, you will end up somewhere very different. And unfortunately, we could not reclaim that additional URL. So thenarrativeproject.org is where you want to land. And yeah, the first phase of what we're building out, like I said, is two cohort-based training programs. One is working with young pastors, emerging leaders, and folks who are in civil service, but deeply formed by their Christian faith, social justice activists who are also embedded in Christian communities, and artists, and everywhere in between, with this big idea of how do you tell your community's story? How do you tell your own story, but in a way that overlaps the story of who Jesus is in your particular telling of it and your work in the world. So we know that, as a publication that does a print magazine, a beautiful print magazine every month, the written word is really our home base. So a lot of what we're doing is helping people translate their work into op-eds and explainers, but then also first person participatory journalism. We know that even just looking at the Washington Post here in recent days, as this is being recorded, news desks, even at very relatively well-funded publications, are really under threat, not just from kind of political ways that could be true, but also just financially. The market's really different than it used to be even 10 years ago. And so the kind of growing realization is that if there's going to be religion news reporting in any kind of comprehensive way, it'll be through a diffused network of people who maybe don't have that as their first or even second or third income stream, but care about doing first person reporting on things happening in their neighborhood and ways that they see churches and communities of faith coming alive and doing good work in the world. And so we're partnering with Tracy Simmons out of FAVES, Faith and Values of Spokane, to start doing participatory journalism training as well. And that's been really exciting. So that's one core of what we're doing. In a second lane, we're working with scholars of religion. So that could be thought fairly broadly, not just folks who might be in a traditional div school, but even folks doing curriculum education development and folks working all over the academy.
Sociologists of religion, maybe.
Sociologists of religion, exactly. But thinking broadly about, how do lots of different disciplines come to bear on the story of American faith? I think, again, in generations past, we had biblical studies, theology, and maybe, a couple others that would be in the conversation of who cares about American Christianity. But the top's really been blown off of that in powerful ways. And I think those kind of hard lines that used to exist among the social sciences, especially, just aren't as relevant anymore. And interdisciplinary work is valued, not seen as a threat to the integrity of a discipline. So we're trying to capitalize on that and help these scholars speak to questions that are facing the American church, and to do that in a way that is, again, centered in their lived story of faith. Sometimes I think, particularly in the spaces I've encountered academically, it can almost feel punished to talk about having a first person faith experience, because it might undermine the sense of objectivity you might bring to your studies. What we're wanting to say is that while in some venues that may be the case, some academic journals, there's all sorts of other public-facing writing that folks can do where that actually really helps others connect to the value and the import of their work, but also to make organic connections to their own life in a way that brings the scholarship alive and helps those academics be speaking to a broader audience, and hopefully help kind of focus and nuance the conversations we're having out in congregations and elsewhere. So that's a year-long training program we're doing with about a dozen scholars of religion, again, thought broadly from across the United States. And it starts with an in-person training. We partnered with Sacred Writes out of Northeastern University to do that. And then, out of that, we've got folks who are doing podcast interviews, and then some of their work is featured in the Christian Century in a new section we're launching, both them and the first cohort, but others are publishing other places, and we're excited about that too, as a way to kind of cast the seeds wide. And then the third thing we're working on right now are what we're calling community reading circles. So this is a series of partnerships with individual congregations. We've got action-oriented reflection guides that take content that they might encounter in places like the Christian Century, and they form circles of 12 to 15 folks who are reading the century every month, but then identifying one story that speaks to something, the heart of what their congregation might care about. And then there are staged responses, and always staged invitations to an active response. And at the first step level, it might just be praying differently or thinking differently or committing to read more about a certain subject. But that stages that all the way to an invitation for congregations to stage specific responses that they could organize together. So as a small example, one of our editorials was about Zoran Mamdani's
Mhm.
election. And, in a small way, the kind of immediate, what could I personally do in the next 24 hours kind of response, it just was like, do a social media feed audit. You probably hear about Muslims in the United States, but do you hear about Muslims in the United States from other Muslims? Or are your only the only sources you engage
Yeah.
there from folks like CNN or Christian or secular folks talking about Muslims here? And that's relatively easy, but even just shifting how the algorithm feeds you information by following a different voice, it could be the beginning of something that grows in someone's life. So that's the example of a small step, all the way up to inviting what would it look like for our congregation to host, an ecumenical or interfaith peace feast around Thanksgiving, which
Hmm.
congregations have done. So it's not brand new, but something you might not have occasion to think about in the ordinary work of just keeping church business moving forward. So it's everything on that range, and we're trying to figure out are there ways that the mainline Protestant church could be invited into a broader sense of connection with their community, closing that feedback loop where we find good stories of where congregations have tried something, experimented, and have a story to share, and then putting that back in the pages of the magazine and elsewhere. So that's what we've been up to up to this point.
It's so much to do, and I mean, to do even just those three things and the amount of time that you've had the grant, I mean, that's incredible. And I know that there's more to come. What can you talk a little bit about what sort of what's been a key point of learning, or like what's maybe something you tried and thought would work, but just like hasn't panned out exactly the way you thought it would?
I think the biggest piece on that is we walked in with an assumption that we all mostly knew where the center of gravity was for the not MAGA version of
Hmm.
Christianity. And I'm learning very quickly, and I think we're learning, especially in this first year, that it's a lot more difficult in many respects to create a positive vision that you articulate of what an alternative would be to those two stories.
Mm.
And yeah, a lot more I could say about that, but it's hard to do life together actually, especially when you're pulling together people who have a lot of different starting points, and especially in a context where we don't have recourse to shared language or shared liturgy. Really learning to walk forward with trust and a degree of vulnerability to be able to share from a different starting point. And we've been very intentional about drawing from a range of communities, both, in terms of denomination, but also ethnicity and rural urban divide, et cetera, as much as we're able, trying to really get a snapshot of who is the American church, not just in terms of, white mainline Protestant. And we're also working with some progressive Catholic folks and folks who might call themselves third way evangelicals or post evangelicals. Yeah, and I think the other piece is we've all probably heard about deconstruction in its varied uses, not the academic use of that word, but in terms of people's
Hmm.
faith life. I think the next challenge we're feeling into is what is the reconstruction, if you can use that, or the synthesis that comes after the falling apart.
Yeah.
And it's really interested and be in conversation with whom about some kind of shared articulation of that. Um, and I think the question always in the background is, is there anything we can say with one voice as an alternative to some of the things we're observing, or is the kind of pluriform witness, is that the new thing that is kind of being birthed here?
I think that is such a critical distinction and question about this. Like, can the cacophony ever become a symphony? Because there are so many expressions. I mean, you just listed off so many different things, identities and social locations and things. And I thought, like, well, y'all are not making it easy on yourselves.
Yeah,
Like, I affirm it, and it's the right approach. But having been in some of that work currently and in the past, I know some small piece of the challenge there about yeah, trying to find, what can we say together or even say in the same way, maybe that isn't watered down to the point of being irrelevant to anybody. Anyway, I think I'm glad you all are up to the task, and it's an important endeavor for sure. What's giving you hope these days? I mean, so, you're sort of like, you're in a part of the process that a lot of us will be in, in the future. And sort of, I know that in these big grant funded things. You can kind of get bogged down in the details and things can feel like a slog. But as you're looking backwards a little bit and forward to the next few years, I mean, what's keeping you going and giving you inspiration?
I've seen people take next steps in their own development of a public voice or kind of integrity as a writer. That has felt particularly motivating. And it's not all the same. So for some folks, it's, I'm a visual artist and I preach, but I've never done a written piece like this that would be featured in a publication. And even just having that sense of permission to experiment and try something, but also that sense of confidence to say, I can work in this medium and actually my voice is needed here. That has been exciting to see in small ways. I think the flip side is just the real eagerness from a community perspective. In particular, talking with congregations. I mean, we're working with folks as far and wide as like Spokane, Washington, clear out to Concord, Massachusetts, and folks in Kansas City, Missouri, and everywhere in between. There's a real hunger for this kind of conversation and a real activation energy, I think, that's available. I don't pretend that there's an unambiguous way to corral all of that and some kind of lasting mobilization that's going to, change the face of everything. But I see people who are eager to try something and desperately want to be in conversation and community with others. I think that sense of isolation, that I'm observing this stuff and it looks like there's nothing I can do about it. And then I go back and feel isolated in those feelings. That even just creating a circle where we're acknowledging that we all care about this thing and we're kind of scared of some of the same things has been really life-giving to watch people hold each other. And I'm hopeful probably more than anything else for those circles of belonging where we at least connect around the same story, not to overuse, the grant word.
No, but that's beautiful. I mean, who knows when people will end up listening to the podcast. And I just, at some point, these like words of encouragement, maybe at the beginning of a project are not so needed because you're full of adrenaline and enthusiasm and all of that. And maybe, yes, it's daunting, but you're excited. But there does come a point where it's like hearing you say that actually is like, I'm filing it away in my own head for like, I bet I'm going to need this message in, 6 months or a year or something. So thank you. Okay. To close this out here, Ross, what's a good story that you've heard lately or that read or that you've seen on a movie or podcast, like just as an example of storytelling? It doesn't have to be part of the initiative, but it could be. What's giving you inspiration?
I should have something ready to go from the initiative, but because it's so present on my mind, I just watched The Testament of Ann Lee last night.
Oh, yeah.
It was vivid and visceral and gory at moments, but very compelling about a new American religious movement. For those who haven't seen it, I made a joke that it's kind of like a jukebox musical of Shaker spiritual songs, but it really does. It feels very experimental and visceral in a way that really connected me to Ann Lee's story. So that's probably
incredible.
Quickest thing off my top of my head.
Yeah, that's perfect. It'll go on my religious viewing for 2020. I still haven't watched the Knives Out, the third one that was so much religious overtone. So I've got that on my list too. Well, thank you so much, Ross. This is great. I mean, we're going to be checking in with you again as the months and years roll through here. But I would encourage people to check out the Narrative Project. There's really interesting ways to get engaged, but also I think like things that we could all learn from the approach. You got the map there with like, it really is every time zone, that you're covering in so many different places around the country. So it's a resource that's well worth checking out. And hopefully, we'll get a chance to connect around some shared work down the line, because I think what you all are doing at the Century is an important platform for being able to tell some of the stories that are going to emerge potentially out of, even the wider initiative. So thank you.
You bet. And Josh, on that last point, we're coming up on March 2026 as this is being recorded. In that edition of the Christian Century, we're launching a new section that's particularly committed to the Narrative Project. But we are open and excited about sharing stories of partner organizations that are part of this grant initiative. And if there are good stories to share, that's at least one venue. We've got others, but that's one immediately that we could be connecting with others who want to share their good news there.
That's really incredible. And so, Ross, what would be the best way for people to get in touch with you or with the magazine for that opportunity?
Yeah, we've got one of those kind of connect all forms at thenarrativeproject.org. If you click the yellow button in the upper right-hand corner, that's an easy way to get started. My email address is also on there, but we'll hope to not get it too bot spammed.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, fair. Fair. Yeah, that's a big yellow connect button. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. That's super, super useful. And again, appreciate the time, appreciate the conversation. More to come for sure. Hi, folks. Welcome back. I love that conversation. It was great to get to connect with Ross. I found him. We've talked a couple of times over the last year, and I found him to be so compelling. And the work that they're doing, and the expansive way that they're thinking about all the audiences that they're working with, and just, I mean, like I said in the intro leading in, it's so the fit, like the match, but it's like they did not sit down to get, it feels like to me anyway, they did not sit down to write a $5 million grant, right? They sat down to like do the work that Christian Century is uniquely suited to do in the context of this grant, and then put forth and like, let's see if that's also compelling to Lily, which in case it was. Well, I don't know what did you all think? I've heard it. I did the interview, but what did you all, what were your responses?
I feel like even going back to some of the conversation we were having before the interview and the intro portion, I am so grateful for the frameworks they gave of how they're thinking about the narratives they're uniquely trying to address. And so that I'm grateful for. And also really grateful for them naming the assumptions about those narratives that they made going in that they've had to work through themselves and shift and change, that going through, their own narrative change process themselves of like, how do we, and what what I think is so great about that, and I think is so good to keep in mind, is like what in us needs to stay soft inside of this to make sure that we're also changing along the way, that our narratives are shifting as they need to for the work to be what it needs to be in this time. And so grateful for them to openly name that there were narratives they held that needed to change too, assumptions they made that needed to be reworked. So great.
Elizabeth, I'm curious here if we like, have you found that to be like an important, is that just like unique to Christian Century, or is it like, no, before you can do any meaningful narrative change work externally, you have to make sure that you've done the work internally because you've led this effort?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I say I've told people that narrative change work is holding your soul up to a mirror and asking if what does it tell you? What does that reflection tell you about the biases you hold, the assumptions you make, the beliefs you have you hold, and then who has to deal with the ramifications of all of those things that you are aware of or not aware of, you know? And so I think as an organization too, or as a team, it's critical to be able to do that honestly and to put something out there that others can participate in that same process with and alongside you. I think it absolutely does. And I feel like, for example, when I was leading the narrative change project for the last 5.5 years that I was leading, we set out with a real key audience in mind of and the narrative we were looking to shift that we believed they held. Well, what we learned is actually, those people don't live and function in isolation. They function and live in an ecosystem, meaning their narrative is informed by this narrative over here, by this group of people that was not our primary audience. And actually, this narrative needed to change. They needed to change together. And so I feel like we've learned some hard lessons around how to create convenings, resources that are aware, maybe not speaking directly to, but aware of all of those dynamics.
I feel like we could just go completely off on that right there, which is like the narrative that people have and what it's informed by and the system it lives within. And we actually need to, and how you change at both. That feels like, I'm not going to go there right now, but I feel like we should just talk to you, more every week, Elizabeth. Hey, listening to Ross, I think you're right. You said in the introduction, Josh, that they're just like an execution engine. And I would say I was listening to this and I thought, wow, they are just on it. They execute. It feels like they're already doing so much. It feels like listening to what they've achieved feels like they've been doing this work for like 2 to 3 years, not just a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I do think that is representative of what you said as well, which is like, this is who Christian Century is. And it's like, this is like just allowing them to like expand who they are, their reach, their audience, and like different methodologies that can take what Christian Century is and has always been to the next level, which I think feels such, I mean, it'll be really interesting how I think this work impacts Christian Century as an org for like the next,
Hmm.
20 to 50 years in the life of the church. But
Yeah. Well,
I do love it, what they're doing.
and like I'm thinking if I put my CEO, executive director, leader hat on, you think about what they're doing in terms of um, not just how they're executing the grant, but the ways that it touches on the core products, for lack of a better word, or offerings of Christian Century, and the way that they're inviting space into the magazine and offerings on a regular basis in a very formal way. This is not a small bet on their part. That they're giving. I mean, I don't want to suggest like it's a wholesale change in strategy. It's nothing like that. But this is like they're not dipping a toe here. Like they really embraced this and bringing some organizational resources, but also reputation to bear on how this is going to show up in the world, which I find that kind of leadership to be not always the easiest decisions to make. Clearly better when you make them with other people, as it seems like they have as a team decided like this is a thing we're all going to embrace, and just a really exciting model for. A lot of times these grants are housed, people are doing them as part of other work that's going on. Like, Shannon, you've mentioned that Rooted Good, you have other things going on. At Future Faith, we have other things going on. Virginia Theological Seminary has 3 or 4 other Lilly grants, for example.
Yeah.
And so how do you execute something that actually does into who you are, as much as it is sort of like this service or offering to the field? I was thinking about that for days after the conversation.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate, Shannon, like what you were just saying, that both, and I think I've admired the organizations that do this well, that adapt the grant program into their already existing work and ethos so naturally. But also, I think something that you were alluding to is, and at the scale that organization can do that.
Yeah.
And with the capacity that they have to meet that scale. And I think that, there's all sorts of organizations, sizes listening. Well, hopefully. I mean, who knows? Maybe we're the only 3 listening to this. But but that are that have received a grant that I think could hear today, and even though the Century has a year under their belt, but feel a bit of intimidation. But I think that what I glean from this is they have aligned this RFP and the work of this grant to their work already, and that they're doing it at a scale that is right sized to their capacity, and that feels like something to highlight.
Oh, go ahead, Shannon. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think you're right. And at the same time, it's like, but here they are, they're saying, look, but the whole media market has changed. Like they've been a media company. Right. And they're also saying, but the whole media market is changing, right? And how do they do this grant that both serves who they're going to become, right? So again, sticks to scale, is in their wheelhouse. And I think also, how do you attract new people? I mean, I don't feel like Christian Century is a publication I was reading 10 years ago. I don't, but I think, wow, they're really thinking who's the new audience and who's the new content maker that we can help find their voice and their platform now, which I just think it's super exciting to see, what that's going to be. But their reach, again, I know that both of the other people we've talked to are thinking nationally and locally, but I feel like this is the truest, this is national, they're referencing, we're working with people in Massachusetts and in the Northwest, and we're, broadly saying we're looking to reclaim the story of American Christianity, right? It's up for grabs and we're going to reclaim it. And, I love that ambition. Love the.
Yeah, I was like, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah. And confident, Ross just confidently said, this is what our project is all about. And so I love that.
Yeah.
So I think I cut you off though, Josh. What were you going to say?
No, I'm so glad you did, because my question is more of a meta question of I feel like I've heard this a lot, not just for this grant, but with grants in general, where people are saying things like, oh, they're using it to do the work that they're well suited to do, which I think in its can be heard sometimes as like, well, they were already doing this work and they just got money to keep doing the work that they were doing. And it's sort of like a pejorative, like that stinks. Like they didn't really do anything new. Can the two of you talk just a little bit about like how do you thread that needle when you're applying for grants, when you're looking at RFPs of like, well, we don't want to establish something that's completely adjacent to our core, like what our organization does. Part of the reason why we get funded for things is because we do what we do very well. But also like we're not asking for money just to do stuff that we were already going to do anyway.
I feel like I'm in the middle of, I just finished a grant report and then working on a case for support right now. And I'm a high context person. So I went back and reviewed all of the grants that we've received over the last decade from this entity, and saying, what are there trends in what we've learned from receiving the financial support from this institution? And then how does that fold into where we're strategically moving as an organization, and to celebrate those learnings? And I do feel like when I look at new RFPs, I mean, there's some exciting ones out there right now by the Lilly Endowment and other institutions that just in how they're framed, I'm like, I can see our organization fitting into here, but but I think that the way that I've found best doing that is couching it inside of a large context of what have we learned recently and what do we want to learn moving forward, and how does this grant help us do that and on what we uniquely bring. I think that the thing that working with several organizations that have applied for grants is, I think applying for outside funding begs you to know who you are inside and out. And it begs for good leadership so that you're not chasing just money. And so I feel like if those two things are true for organizations, then I think they can navigate RFPs with real honesty for themselves and what they're and how they're applying, how they're applying for what they're applying for.
That's super helpful.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think grants beg you to like know who you are, and because if not, you'll get taken. The money will create mission drift. Like you'll chase an RFP and you'll become something new, and you don't want to do something totally adjacent. Like I think so in some ways the storytelling work from us, if we look at it from Rooted Good, like the reason we're in it, storytelling is not our wheelhouse, but it's like we need these stories to exist in the world for our work to be done. And we have an adjacency to this work that we feel like matters. But if it were like the soul of our work, it wouldn't make sense. I also think there's something about the economics of it. To me, if it's just going to keep you doing what you've always done, like you've got a program and you just keep getting a grant to just run it, or a methodology, like, this is who we are, we do this and it's all we do, it's our bread and butter, then you're just looking at grants to subsidize or fund the work. And I want to go, well, if that's the case, do people really want what you're doing? Are they coming to it because you continue, like you've just got grants to pay for it that allow people to participate? And so to me, I have questions about that. So I think it's like we can't just look for grants to subsidize all the time what we already do. Like there has to be demand. You talked earlier about supply and demand, Josh. It's like we need that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And yeah, I think that's where I would.
I don't disagree. At the same time, I do believe that there's like, as Shannon Ross told me this once, he was like, that there are some things that it's okay. Like it's okay if we end up renewing things. There's work that shouldn't be profit driven or shouldn't be monetized. Like there are things that our foundations are uniquely suited to do. And but I hear you in the sense of like, but for how long? And it like not forever. And I didn't want to get us off track, but I'm super, because I don't feel like that's what's happening at Christian Century. Like I feel like they are
all.
like like this is not work that they were going to do anyway. They took this as an opportunity to do the work that needed to be done, and also to inform or to learn, as Elizabeth was saying, like what do we need to learn from this that will help our organization move to the next level. That's the best kind of like intersection for me between those things.
I agree. And I think this is like where grant work can make an incredible difference
It's true.
in our ecosystem, because by Christian Century doing this work, it's going to make them such a better media company in our ecology. And we need it. We
I would think so.
need Christian Century to be the best organization that it can be at this moment in time. So yeah.
Also getting grant money, I mean, to experiment in our wheelhouse, like I like to try new
Yes.
things. It does, like, in a way that without it, it would have been really challenging. It sounds like, I mean, they're pressing on edges and boundaries that so many media companies, faith oriented or not right now, there's little capacity for experimentation right now. Amazing conversation with my Lyft driver to the airport actually the other day was, cameraman for a local news station, and we processed his career inside of media in our country, and how he landed here in San Antonio. And it was really, really eye-opening to me. I mean, reading about what's going on in our culture and society right now in terms of our media production and feel adjacent to it and, maybe distantly sad and not knowing how to engage. I have friends whose docuseries got canceled, things like that. But to talk with this cameraman and really talk about like what is changing in the larger ecosystem of how we get information with AI and with other things, with our federal administration's, kind of challenge of media today. What an opportunity. And this is what I heard inside the interview to say, not us. We have an opportunity here to step out, try something new, to be a voice and to have resilience during a time when so many things are shuttering. And media establishments are shuttering. I think it's really exciting and hopeful, and I'm excited to watch them over these next several years.
Yeah, I mean, Ross is sort of soft-spoken, but I really took this kind of conviction around like, well, that's not all. Yes, things are happening to us, but we can also happen to those things. Like we're
Yes.
not losing our role as the protagonist in this world. Like this is not, we're moving forward faithfully, which I loved. Okay, so wrap up here. Like, what other takeaway that you had from the interview from Ross? Or what did you learn that you might carry forward in the last couple minutes here?
Do you want to go? I feel ready.
Go, Shannon.
Okay.
Go, Shannon.
I love that. I love that they're really helping people find a new way to have a public voice. And so when you ask like what's giving him hope, it's like people are developing a new public voice, and that they're seeing out of these community reading circles, they're actually seeing people like get information and act on it, that it's actually helping people take a step. And so I love that they're already seeing that so quickly. And I love that it is increasing their confidence in experimentation. I'm really just excited. I wanted to hear more when he talked about how much the media market is changing, and that if there's going to be any kind of religion news reporting, it will be through a diffused network. And that's what he said. And I thought, man, I want to talk about that. Like, and just going back to our conversation about the grant, like, wow, is that not, part of what is going to happen or has the possibility of happening through all of these grants is this like diffused network, which if 10% of it rose up to like do some real reporting, what would that change? So yeah, no, I loved it. And I did like your you asked, he started talking about from deconstruction to reconstruction. I feel like I'd love us to that, because we've had other guests talk about, it's re-enchantment of Christianity and, but when you have all these different ways that people deconstructed or reconstructing, can you get one story out of that? Can you create the symphony?
Yeah.
I loved that question you asked him, Josh. So from the cacophony to the symphony. So yeah, it was a great.
What about you, Elizabeth?
Yeah. I mean, I already named it. I feel like a broken record. I think his honesty about the assumptions that they held there, they had to shift. I think it makes it, you then have to be able to name your assumptions to know if they need to change. And so all of that good, hard internal work, it's evident that they're doing that. And so I'm taking that with me and grateful for.
Well, and I found the invitation for collaboration, and they're thinking about the field, which naturally, I mean, they're a big, they're a media company. They need people to write for, but this like, oh no, we're doing this with the larger, even storytelling grant ecosystem in mind, and like, there's a place for you. I love that very open-handed invitation. Made me really excited. Yeah, great stuff. And I'm sure we'll be following up with Ross more as time goes on. Okay, well, that's a wrap for this session. big thanks, Elizabeth, Shannon, and of course to our guest here, Ross Allen from Christian Century. We're here to help build a stronger storytelling ecosystem. We're going to do that through this podcast. You can find it and other resources at futurefaith.org/storytelling. And we'll have webinars and blog posts and other things there just to sort of help us, push us all along. A really interesting database of resources that are in the works will hopefully be posted there in the coming months. And if you have an idea for a guest that we should have on, or if you want to you can self-nominate. If you want to talk about your own project, we're happy to have you. So drop me a line. It's josh@futurefaith.org. Thanks for listening, everybody. You've been listening to the Backstory podcast. For all the episodes and more resources, head over to www.futureoffaith.org/storytelling.